Japan's three megabanks aren't just launching a coin, they are building a shared issuance rail under a trust. It's the first serious non-US answer to who gets to mint a currency's digital form and who keeps the float that comes with it. The structural mirror image of deposit defense dynamic. The first is the timeline, a yen stablecoin by March 2027, which tells us when and not what. The second is the familiar Japan still prefers cash and cards framing, which treats this as a retail adoption story. It does neither. What MUFG, SMBC, and Mizu actually announced is a structural choice about the issuance topology, who is permitted to mint the digital yen, through what legal vehicle, and where the resulting economics accrue. Read at that level, and it's the most consequential stablecoin design decision a developed banking system has made as yet. In the US framework built around the Genius Act, the incumbent banks are on the defensive. Non-bank issuers mint the stablecoins, and tokenized deposits are the bank's instrument for keeping the balances and the float that they generate inside the deposit base. Japan's megabanks have chosen the opposite structure. Rather than defend the float deposit side, they are pooling it. Issuance and reserve economics are kept inside the banking system through a jointly controlled trust with no non-bank issuer in the loop. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and welcome back to the Capital Insights series. This series sits within our Fundamentals of the Noise series at Punjab Capital Research, and today we wanted to continue our coverage of stablecoins. So today we wanted to discuss with you stablecoins and their issuance in Japan. Let's talk about pulling the float out here. Japan's three megabanks aren't just launching a coin, they are building a shared issuance rail under a trust. It's the first serious non-US answer to who gets to mint a currency's digital form and who keeps the float that comes with it. The structural mirror image of deposit defense dynamic. Let's start by reframing the entire story out here. Now, there were two narratives that framed the 10th June announcement, and according to us at Punjab Capital, both are noise. The first is the timeline, a yen stablecoin by March 2027, which tells us when and not what. The second is the familiar Japan still prefers cash and cards framing, which treats this as a retail adoption story. It does neither. What MUFG, SMBC, and Mizu actually announced is a structural choice about the issuance topology, who is permitted to mint the digital yen, through what legal vehicle, and where the resulting economics accrue. Read at that level, and it's the most consequential stablecoin design decision a developed banking system has made as yet. It's the structure that matters out here. The three banks are not issuing a coin each. They are acting as joint settlers on a single trust, with trust banks serving as trustees that issue the instrument, each bank co-committing assets into the trust rather than floating a priority token. The output is classified as an electronic payment instrument under the 2023 Payment Services Act amendments, a third legal category that is neither a bank deposit and nor a security. It runs on MUFG's Progmat platform with issuance supported across multiple public chains. The council formed this month is tasked with finalizing the scheme design and governance before the fiscal year winter closes on 31st of March 2027. The mechanics of the story out here, the coin is incidental. Let's get to the float read now. Now, this is a structural inverse of the dynamic that we mapped in defending the float a couple of days earlier in our video. In the US framework built around the Genius Act, the incumbent banks are on the defensive. Non-bank issuers mint the stablecoins, and tokenized deposits are the bank's instrument for keeping the balances and the float that they generate inside the deposit base. Japan's megabanks have chosen the opposite structure. Rather than defend the float deposit side, they are pooling it. Issuance and reserve economics are kept inside the banking system through a jointly controlled trust with no non-bank issuer in the loop. And that makes one question central, and it is still unanswered. Under a joint settler trust, where does the reserve carry land? The float on the fiat-backed stablecoin, the yield on the assets held in the reserve is the entire economic price. Whether it splits across the three settlers, retained at the trust, or routed to a Progmat level entity is a design decision that the council has yet not made. The architecture is still wet cement out here, which is precisely why it is worth flagging now rather than after it sets. A second-order note follows directly. If the reserve is held in Japanese government bonds, the structure JPYC's yen stablecoin already uses, then scaled issuance routes incrementally, largely priced insensitive demand into the JGB market. Now, at the current ambition, the figure is immaterial to the JGB pricing. The mechanism, however, is a structural wire that grows with adaptation and worth tracking as such. And this brings us to the familiar issue that we track across stablecoins and tokenized deposits, that is rail and not the product. The most revealing feature is the one that is easiest to overlook. The three direct competitors are cooperating. They are treating issuance not as a product to compete on, but as shared infrastructure to build once. The logic of a card network or a domestic debt scheme, not circle versus tether. The Council's open participation clause, which leaves room for other institutions also to join, confirms the intent. This is being built as a de facto national rail and not a three-bank consortium product. The contrast with the fragmented US issuer landscape is the point out here. Where the US has competing private coins rather than share, Japan is constructing a single bank-owned utility, a utility that captures the float by default. And this brings us to the real wedge. The near-term use case is wholesale and not retail. The consortium operating under Project Pax banner targets 1 trillion yen in business-to-business volume by 2028. Anchored on roughly 300,000 corporate clients, the three banks collectively serve and on cross-border settlement proof of concept run through the Mitsubishi Corporation. The wedge is the corporate cross-border settlement where inefficiencies are real and client relationships already exist. Retail adoption that most of the coverage led with is later and a separate question altogether, and not the one that determines whether this matters or not. Let's wrap up this video with the allocator read-through and also connecting the threads. When we are talking about the allocator read-through, there are three implications worth holding. First, precedent. A working bank-issued trust model is a direct challenge to the assumption that non-bank issuance is the destination state. If this scales, it becomes a template that other bank-led systems, for example, in other countries, in Korea and Gulf, are most likely to copy. Secondly, it raises the bar on the tokenized deposit thesis as the only bank answer to the stablecoin disintermediation. Pooling is now a demonstrated alternative. Thirdly, the reserve mechanics create a slow-building, adoption-linked JGB bid worth tracking. At Punjab Capital, we treat the parallel ambition, that is the ruling party's push to make yen stablecoins a settlement currency across Asia, separately in our fault line series. Now, because this is a monetary statecraft question constrained by yen's negligible share of global stablecoin supply and not a structural one. And finally, let's connect all the threads. Now, this particular note extends a continuing Punjab Capital research thread on who issues digital money and who keeps the economies. A question that we first flagged in May 2025 when the banks began exploring the joint stablecoin issuance. We have covered this extensively in our Defending the Float episode and our US-China stablecoin divergence. Catch those episodes on our channel and stay tuned in for what comes next.